Hey, you guys know there aren't actually any real threats to the United States, right? It's all theater. Like last month, we learned that the United States had blown through one of China's biggest red lines on Taiwan, a red line of 40 years standing. We did it at least a year ago, but Beijing and Washington, D.C. are competing to see who can mention it the least. Are you worried about Russia and how they're taking the Middle East away from us or something? Well, about 3 years ago, a handful of U.S. soldiers killed somewhere between dozens and hundreds of Russian fighters. Did it bring about World War III? No. Moscow and the United States competed to hide it. You worried about Iran? I mean, come on. We killed the second most powerful person in Iran last year. And yeah, the Iranians threw a couple missiles at our base, but they made sure we knew the missiles were coming. This is all theater. This is all BS. All of it. Our defense budgets, it's all just a sham. And other countries are forced to participate in it because they don't want to admit how weak they are. Iran doesn't want to admit its weakness. China doesn't want to admit its weakness. Russia doesn't want to admit its weakness. And 90% of U.S. foreign policy reporting is theater designed to drive up U.S. defense budgets. And it works. We're spending about as much money right now as we spent at the height of the Cold War. When things actually mattered. And we haven't needed this money for 30 years. And what we've seen over the past decade is the United States getting progressively more and more aggressive and more unwilling to let any other country in the world do anything without our say-so. And we need to do that to keep the theater going because everybody's so weak that we have to get so far into their business to prompt a response. This may sound like sort of like a funny or a patriotic observation, but it's really not. What it is scary, because we're not just kicking around like authoritarian countries like Russia or China anymore. We've started kicking around our allies, like Germany. We're trying to tell Germany where it can and cannot get its energy from. This kind of thing is just going to accelerate if we keep giving money to the Pentagon. If we keep giving the Pentagon money, it's going to keep inventing reasons to use it. Some of it will be somewhat farcical, like UFOs, but a lot of it will just be picking fights in places we don't need to be. The most important thing we could do for U.S. security right now is to take the budgets for the Pentagon and the intelligence community and cut them in half. Best thing for U.S. security, best thing for the world's security. Tell me what you think.
Quick reality check. If China or Russia were a real threat to the United States, we'd be doing what we did in the 1970s. We'd be trying to get close to one of them to turn them against the other one. They're not real threats. We're just looking for excuses to sell weapons. I know this because not only are we supposed to freak out about China, we're supposed to freak out about Russia, and we're supposed to freak out about Iran, and we're supposed to freak out about terrorism, and we're supposed to freak out about UFOs, and we're supposed to freak out about Havana Syndrome. The whole point is just to get the U.S. public to freak out and acquiesce in these insane defense budgets that we're going to have apparently for the rest of my life. So, just some late-night truth-telling.
So the U.S. military-industrial complex is just getting more and more desperate for your money. Look at this stuff that they're pulling now. The bad guys are winning. Leaving aside how infantile this is, it's completely ignorant. It's ridiculous. The bad guys, which is an absurd way to refer to anything in geopolitics, are losing miserably. So first off, we can ignore Maduro of Venezuela, Lukashenko of Belarus, and sadly, Turkey of Erdogan. Erdogan of Turkey. Ooh, Freudian slip there. All of these places are just basket case economies, not real competitors anymore, and it hurts my heart to say that about Turkey, a place that I love, but that's what Erdogan has done to it. So what the greedy children at the Atlantic are mostly talking about is Putin's Russia and the China of Xi Jinping. What are we competing with these folks over? To claim that they are winning just fails the most basic analysis. The big controversy with Russia right now is that it's moving its troops around its own country, and they're threatening Ukraine. The big controversy with China is that they're flying their fighter jets in slightly higher numbers a little little bit closer to Taiwan in airspace that's actually also theirs. This is not a real competition. This is not something that we should be worried about. Ukraine is a place that was part of the Russian Empire for 200 years. Taiwan is a place that was part of the Chinese Empire for 200 years. I'm not saying that the independence of those places isn't important or worthwhile. Not sure it's really a core U.S. interest, but, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. What I'm saying is we're not competing over Long Island here, folks. We're not even competing over Cuba or Germany or Vietnam. That place is, firmly in our camp, which happened when, we stopped trying to militarize everything, as we are today. We are fighting over places that have large populations that speak the same languages of Russia and China. One of the main political issues in China right now is keeping its rich people from moving and taking their money to the United States. This is not a competition. It's largely over. The main threat in the world today is not these bad guys. It's the fact that the United States has refused to accept the fact that it won like 30 years ago. If there are any bad guys in the world today, it's the people in Washington, D.C. who are giving money to the Atlantic to produce this crap. That's what's making the world more dangerous. The U.S. insistence on not taking yes for an answer. We won. We need to stop backing these places into a corner, which is the main reason that people like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping are in power. Hey, you guys know that the conflict in Ukraine is the U.S.'s fault, right? Standard disclaimers apply. Russia is scary. Putin is scary. Yes, obviously invasion is bad, but none of that makes up for some really basic facts. In 2013, Ukraine was a united country. No Russians in Crimea, no war, 13,000 more people alive, and Ukraine had a democratically elected president. Don't get me wrong, Yanukovych was a bad president. He was staggeringly corrupt, bad dude, sucked. But he was a democratically elected president under a Ukrainian constitution that, in 2013 and the beginning of 2014, the United States conspired to overthrow. We participated in a coup. We organized a coup. John McCain was on the ground supporting the coup. This isn't actually something that's disputed at all. I'd urge you to Google Victoria Nuland, an official in the Obama administration who is inexplicably also an official in the Biden administration responsible for Ukraine policy. Her conversations were leaked before Yanukovych even fell. So she was organizing the opposition. She was setting up the government that was going to come subsequent to the coup before it actually happened, before Yanukovych gave up and fled the country. It's not a question. The U.S. did this. For the longest time, I didn't really want to face up to the fact that what we did in Ukraine was a coup, because there were all those protesters, there were all those people who fought on the streets. It's clear that significant portions of the Ukrainian population wanted this guy to go. I was sympathetic to this street action, and I really was all the way up until January 6th of this year. On January 6th, the United States had almost the exact same thing that they had in Ukraine in 2014. Obviously, with many caveats, it was just a day. It wasn't a months-long thing. The people are obviously much less sympathetic on January 6th, the Trump supporters. But really, the only functional difference between the coup in Ukraine in 2014 and what happened on January 6th in the United States is that there wasn't a massive, near all-powerful world hegemon to support the attempted coup on January 6th in the United States that there was in Ukraine in 2014. Yes, large portions of the Ukrainian population supported those protesters. Unfortunately, the same can be said in the United States. And now today, after the Russian invasion and 7 years of ongoing low-level war, of course the Ukrainian people want to be free of Russian aggression. But what started the process and what might bring us to nuclear war? U.S. action. So you guys know that it was the United States that started the Taiwan crisis, right? I'm the first person to admit that Taiwan is in a really weird situation. This is nowhere near as egregious as what the United States did in Ukraine, for example. Taiwan and China have really real disagreements that are serious, and I don't want to minimize that. But they had a weird status quo that existed for like 50 years. This is where we were in 2015. That is Xi Jinping, China's leader, shaking hands with the Taiwanese president at the time. Now, to be clear, this president's actions may have been unpopular. This meeting may have contributed to his party getting voted out of office, but this is what was possible in 2015. Both of these guys sort of agreed to disagree. They were capable of moving forward, improving trade relations, acting in a peaceful status quo manner despite their very large disagreements on what Taiwan is, who it belongs to, sovereignty, etc. And the status quo is what the Taiwanese people want. This is a poll from June 2021. The Taiwanese people obviously want the status quo because the status quo, very weird relationship between China and Taiwan, is what made Taiwan one of the richest and most developed countries on Earth. The long-settled U.S.-China policy of strategic ambiguity over Taiwan is a little too complicated to try to explain in a 3-minute video, but basically it requires an extraordinary level of politeness and weirdness. We have always armed Taiwan, we have always supported Taiwan diplomatically and economically, but what we haven't done is do that openly. I know this sort of thing sounds ridiculous, but it is the foundation of U.S.-China relations and Taiwan's prosperity over the past half century. And Donald Trump blew it up. We now know that U.S. troops have been on Taiwan not just for at least a year, but for years. All of these crazy aggressive actions that China has supposedly been taking over the past 5 years can be explained by the fact that Donald Trump was throwing out 50 years of settled Taiwan policy. And that's not all. I noticed this recent slip of the tongue in a Foreign Affairs article. Somebody admitting that over the past 5 years, the United States has abandoned engagement and embraced neo-containment. Washington has carried out its largest naval and missile expansion in a generation. We've been doing this for years. Long before any of the awful things that China did that we used to justify this expansion of containment, we've been doing it. We started this.
So lately, I have been accused of being a tankie more and more often. I take this to mean that folks think I'm too friendly to China and Russia. Well, let me be clear. I think that Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping are dangerous thugs. I think that they take actions that are destabilizing. But what I also do is I look at the history of how these folks came to power. And honestly, I think the entity that is most responsible for the success and duration of the careers of these men is the United States government. I think that the United States is the best hegemon the world has ever had. I would like the U.S. empire or U.S. world system to continue. However, I believe that the greatest threat to U.S. hegemony is the U.S. government. Not China, not Russia. These things are after effects of U.S. policy.